If you're looking to sell your home, one of the biggest questions that you probably have on your mind right now is how much am I going to walk away with? In this video, I'm going to break down the closing costs associated with selling your home so you have a better picture of how much you're actually going to be able to put in your pocket after closing. I'm also going to run through a real life Alta statement so you can see the deductions that came out of a real transaction. That's all going to happen right now, so stick around. What's happening, everyone? My name is marc.izquierdo. I'm a real estate agent in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So if you're looking to buy, if you're looking to sell, or even if you just want to talk some real estate, grab my contact information and feel free to reach out. Now, every real estate transaction is a little different and unique in its own way. You should recognize that some of the expenses that I'm talking about in this video may not apply to you, and there might be additional expenses that you see on your side that I may not have covered. So just keep that in mind, but for the most part in this video, you can expect to see most of what I'm talking about. There are three relatively significant expenses that you can expect to see when you sell your home. The first one being transfer taxes, and that varies from location to location. And in Pennsylvania, that's 1% to the state of Pennsylvania, and in Bucks County specifically, it's 1% to the county. So for a combined total of 2%, and that's typically split between the buyer and the seller. So 1% from the seller and 1% from the buyer. Now that's completely negotiable, but conventionally that's how the contract is written. But again, you can split that up however you and your buyer would like. A second big one you're gonna see is real estate commission. Now this is completely negotiable between yourself and your listing agent, but typically you'll see between about 5 and 6%. But again, that's something you'll discuss with your listing agent when you go to list your home. And the third, possibly the most significant expense you're going to see is a mortgage payoff. Depending on how much you owe, it can severely cut into your profits when you sell your house. Another expense that you could see is a seller assist. So what this is the buyer is requesting from the seller to pay some or all of their closing costs. Now this isn't something you need to agree to, but it could be requested from you. And depending on the loan that the buyer is getting, there are limits. So whether they're getting FHA, VA, conventional, there's a limit to how much they could ask for. But they could ask for it, and it's something to be aware of that, if you agree to it, it could come out of your proceeds, when you sell your house. Taxes are another expense that you're gonna see. These are city, town, and school taxes, and they are typically prorated based on when the closing day is. So the seller is typically responsible for, obviously, the time that they've owned the property, and including the closing day. And the buyer is responsible for the day after closing on. Now that's another negotiable item. Conventionally the seller is responsible for the day of settlement, but that can be written into the contract to where maybe the buyer is responsible for the day of settlement. Tax certification. This sort of provides a tax status on the home, tells you what taxes have been paid and maybe what are owed. This will typically run between $100 to $300. You can expect to kind of see that on your expense list. Deed prep services. So the seller is responsible for preparing a deed to convey the property, and that'll run between $75 to $100. Sometimes you could also see a survey expense. So surveys aren't always required. Sometimes they just don't get done. But if they do, you can expect to see it as an expense depending on who orders it. So if the title company needs to perform a survey for some reason, typically that's a seller's expense. But if the lender is requiring a survey, for example, then that would be a buyer's expense. So depending on who needs the survey, that'll kind of dictate whose expense it is. Repairs requested by the buyer. So as the buyer starts to do inspections and walk through the property a little bit more, they might maybe see some things wrong with it and look to the seller to make those repairs or at least pay for those repairs. And those will vary depending on what those repairs are. Another expense you might see is a home warranty. Now, the home warranty might be requested by the buyer. It also might be provided by you, the seller, to make it a little bit more enticing for the buyer to buy the property because it comes with a home warranty. So that'll be an expense, and obviously depending on your coverage, that price could change a little bit. You also might see a notary fee around $15 to $30, an express mail fee, $20 to $30. These are kind of just costs of doing business, but you'll probably see them. So real quick, I'm just gonna pull up an Alta statement so you can see what expenses came out of an actual transaction, and that'll kind of hopefully clear some things up for you. Okay, so here we have an example Alta statement. This is actually a real transaction that closed for $150,000. And here you have in the seller's column the debits and credits. So the sale was obviously a credit to the seller. So here are the city, town, and school taxes that I was talking about earlier. And in this case, it is a seller credit because they had previously paid them already. So I know I had talked about them being a possible expense, but in this case, they could be a credit depending on when you pay those taxes. You can scroll down here. You can see I blocked out some names of the companies that we used in this transaction. You can see a lot of expenses are more for the buyer. So here is a doc prep fee. So this is kind of like the deed prep fee of $75. And here's that tax certification, $275. In this case, it was a reimbursement to the listing agent, but it ends up being a debit to the seller nonetheless. And here we are with the real estate commission. So here is $37.50 paid to the buyer's broker, and then $37.50 paid to the seller's broker. So that's typically how real estate commission is dispersed, half to one party, half to the other party. And both of those are expenses to the seller. Down here we have transfer tax that I was talking about previously. So here the purchase price of the property was $150. So the seller is responsible for $1,500 of the transfer tax. So that's 1%, and the buyer was responsible for the other 1%. So it's that 2% split, 1% to each party. And then here are just some additional expenses. In the beginning of this video, I kind of talked about how each transaction is unique and a little bit different. So this is kind of what makes this transaction a little bit unique here. There's a $250 payment to a fuel company, and then $117.65 payment made for sewer. And both of those are seller debits. So those are expenses that you could see depending on your transaction and what goes on there. So you can see from that example that the seller ended up having about $9,700 worth of expenses and ended up walking away with about $141,000 in profit after closing. Now, fortunately for this seller, they didn't have a mortgage to pay off, so they walked away with a little bit of cash. But every situation is a little bit unique, so it might be different for you. Hopefully this helped you understand some of the closing costs that you might see when you go to sell your property. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out. I'd love to help. Until then, thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.